I spent a lot of time early on in my time at Domain talking to teams about the difference between speed and velocity. And that sounds strange because they're both the same concepts, but they are fundamentally different. Speed is about how fast you can go, and velocity is about how fast you can go, but in the right direction.
You're listening to Elevate, the official podcast of elite agent for real estate industry, sales professionals, property managers, and leaders. We bring you the best minds in business and real estate to help you list more, sell more, and elevate your results. To download your written action guide from this podcast containing extra tips, links, and shortcuts, visit eliteagentelevate.com. Now, here is your host, Samantha McLean.
Welcome to another episode of the Elevate podcast, where we delve into some of the most interesting minds in business and in real estate for the very best tips and strategies for you to implement to elevate your business. I'm Samantha McLean, editor of Elite Agent and host of this week's show. This week we have a special guest in the studio. He is the CEO of Domain Group. Welcome to the show, Jason Pellegrino.
Thanks for having me.
It's awesome to have you here, actually, and we're going to find out a bunch of stuff today about domain strategy moving forward and that sort of thing. But I'd like to kind of go back into your past a bit just to get to know you a little bit better.
Sure.
First of all, you've had a pretty amazing career to date. You started back at KPMG way back in 94, a little bit after I did, actually. I sort of got my start in the professional services area and then went back, funnily enough. But what do you remember of that time?
Yeah, I have some extraordinary memories from that time and a lot of learnings. It was a foundation point for my career. I came out of high school sort of raring to go, wanting to get into the business world. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to sort of work in business. And so I joined KPMG straight out of high school and I did university part-time, worked there for about 6 years and really have some extraordinary memories of people who did what I've subsequently learned was really coaching and helped me better understand business, better understand people, better understand situations and stakeholders. And yeah, it's a great learning experience because as you probably recognize, that professional services environments, you're always on your toes because you're always serving a whole range of different clients and stakeholders. The downside is your time is not your own. You're at the sort of beck and call of what a client needs or a situation needs, but the learning is intense. And at that point in your career, I couldn't fault it.
Yeah, I grew up on the Central Coast and it was my way out of the Central Coast because I thought someone's going to pay me to go to university.
Happy days. The other direction. I'm from Wollongong, so it was a ticket out of Wollongong and into what felt at the time this extraordinarily large sort of city in Sydney.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there was a lot of opportunities I remember with, I was with Ernst & Winnie, who became Ernst & Young. Yep. And I remember there was a lot of opportunities to travel and things like that and go and work for the firm overseas. So you went to London. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
One of the clients I worked with throughout my time at KPMG was PepsiCo. And it was a bit strange because I was a media IT specialist there, particularly leading up to the sort of 2000.com boom. And I remember that was probably the foundation of my interest in technology. But PepsiCo was just a client that I just kept working on for 6 years. And I remember towards the end of my period at KPMG, Pepsi bought a business here, which was Smith's. And I worked on that acquisition for quite a bit of time. And at the end of it, they offered me a role, which I thought was extraordinary, which was essentially traveling around the world, helping them buy businesses, fix businesses, turn around businesses. And that was the beginning of, the better part of 3 years working in, I think, over 20 countries, extraordinarily cultures, particularly in the Middle East, and spending a lot of time through there. And again, that was an enormous learning experience.
Yeah, that would have been absolutely amazing, traveling around and being young and visiting different countries.
It's time of life that works, but the experience, a lot of the businesses were similar. They package soft drink or they package crisps, but a business in Jordan is very different to one in Israel and Egypt. We worked, in the US is different again, and throughout Asia. And just, again, it's an extraordinarily dense period of experience. And, I talk to a lot of people who are starting their career through that, and that yearning for experience or that need for experience and what you get, particularly early on in your career. My encouragement is just look at density, get as much as you can possibly within a short period of time, because it will hold you in good stead later on.
Yeah. And then you joined Google in what I would sort of consider the early-ish days in Australia. What attracted you to the big G?
If I was to be really blunt, I was attracted by the fact that I'd lost my job in the GFC and
Right.
didn't have a job.
Okay, so it's 2008-ish.
Yeah, right in the middle. So I was working in between Pepsi and Google. I'd gone to work for a strategy consulting firm, but a lot of work in private equity and buyouts and hedge funds. And I'd worked in that industry. And that all came to a head with the GFC. And I remember, when Lehman Brothers collapsed, I was out of a job. And it was a good point to reflect back on my career. And I realized that I just actually didn't enjoy working in private equity and finance and the hedge funds. And the reason being, I was more interested in building a business than generating a return.
Yep.
And so reflecting on that, I went back and spoke to everyone that I'd enjoyed my time at Pepsi. I spoke to Pepsi, I spoke to Coca-Cola and Nestle and Procter & Gamble. And a friend of mine said, hey, you should go and talk to these guys at Google. They've got a role going. The role was actually an enormous step backwards. So it was setting up finance at the accounting function in Google. And there was only 40 people in Australia. I walked in very sort of nonplussed about the role, but I met the people and the people were extraordinary. There was a sense of optimism, a sense of real ambition. And I did 13 interviews at the time. That was the process to get into Google.
Wow.
And by the end of it, I was extraordinarily focused. And it was a bit of luck, a bit of timing. But by the time I'd met the people, I knew that it was the right place for me to be.
Yeah. There may be some people listening here who would think, geez, it'd be great to go and work for Google. So you just said 13 interviews. What did Google really look for in their employees?
It's different now. I was there for 10 years. We instituted processes where it was a maximum of 4 interviews, a bit different from 13.
Yep.
But look, it was a very structured process and there was a lot of data involved. So everyone had to say, every aspect was scored. There was a process, and it's a process that works because you really do get to the bottom of bringing talent into the business. Interestingly, if you look at the aspects at which they looked at, one of them, which was role-related knowledge, which is, have you done this role in the past, was actually the least important of everything, because all of the statistics and analysis that they'd done showed that prior experience has the least impact on the ability to be successful in a role.
Yeah.
What are the aspects that make you successful? And there's publicly available data on this, and Google publishes it. It's things like leadership. It is things like problem-solving ability. It's a growth mindset. And there's this concept called googliness. And googliness was always one of these ones that was difficult to explain, but it's more than just fit. Really, it's the ability to be comfortable with ambiguity and change. And that's one thing that I look back at my time at Google and the people I worked with was whether you came into that business with that ability or whether it was sort of coached within you, you came out of that business being deeply, deeply comfortable with change. And not only comfortable with change, but expecting change. And that, I think, is a great set of characteristics in the current environment because, change is only accelerating.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, everyone could do with a bit of that googliness right now, I reckon.
I think so. But, I think we need to reflect. And if we look at the extraordinary sort of waves of change that have hit the real estate industry, even over the last 2 to 3 years. Yes, we're dealing with COVID, but if we go back even only 9 months before that, we were at 20 to 30 year lows in terms of listing volumes. So this is a series of rolling waves that have hit this industry. And you've got to reflect back and be extraordinarily proud about the industry's ability to adapt, to be resilient, and to deal with whatever lies ahead. So, the interesting thing is, yes, having come out of Google, I saw a lot of that. But this is an extraordinarily resilient and adaptive industry. It's, full of people who want to change, who want to drive change. Just look at the fact that at the very height of the COVID lockdown situations, when people were experiencing environments that they'd never experienced before, and people couldn't leave their homes. This is an industry that they're still convinced more than 70% of, typical vendors to sell their house.
Yeah.
Yes, listings were down, but they were down 30% at the bottom. That means that 70% of transactions still occurred. That's extraordinary.
Absolutely. Let's get on to that. So you joined Domain in 2018 after, I guess it could be called a somewhat tricky exit by your predecessor. What attracted you into the real estate industry in the first place, and Domain particularly?
I've always been very passionate and interested in property. I'm Australian. It's definitely one of our national sports. So I come from an immigrant family and I'm first generation. My parents and grandparents and my broader relatives, just like a lot of other immigrant communities, you came to Australia looking for a better life. And one of the parts of a better life was the ability to accumulate wealth through property. And property was the platform. And that has been the Australian platform for wealth creation for extended a long period of time. It will be going forward. So I've always been involved in and interested in property. I think the thing that attracted me to Domain was just a match between what the business needed and what I'm good at and what I really enjoy doing. It was a business that is in technology. It was a business that was at an inflection point of trying to understand what it was. And fundamentally, was it a media business or was it a technology business? It was a business that needed clarity on strategy and focus because it was no longer a startup. It was a scale up and that transition needed to happen. And it was a business that needed work on culture and focus in people. And I put that all together and I thought it was an extraordinarily attractive opportunity. It was also one block away from where I was working, previously at Google. So there's a lifestyle. I have a wife and 4 kids who really enjoy and love living in Sydney. And the pathway at Google for me previously was, after running the country, was definitely going to be sort of a move to the US. And from a lifestyle perspective, I couldn't think of a better business to work on in Australia that's in that inflection point between technology and having the absolute privilege to work in a sector that means so much to people.
So you just talked about some of the issues coming into Domain, and I guess, like looking at your career, it is a great opportunity when you can actually make a real difference in a company. What were your original goals?
So I'd spent a lot of time talking to people within the industry, a lot of agents, people who I knew. I also had the privilege of looking across Asia. I ran strategy for Google across Asia for a number of years before I was the country manager in Australia. And so I'd seen a lot of classified businesses grow. I'd seen a lot of what I'd call, which were the first phases of the internet blooming. It was taking a print model online and creating a demand and a supply side of marketplace. And then you started to see the second phase of evolution where it wasn't such a media model. It was about using data. And I'd seen a lot of these businesses bloom. So, that provided me with the privilege of contacts, expertise, ideas and views. And so it was really fundamentally looking at the Domain business and seeing what's worked elsewhere, what hasn't worked, what are the constructs, what are the assets, what are the things we can work with. And it's not rocket science. It's really more about saying no to things than saying yes when you're at that scale-up position. When you are a startup, you can throw a lot of things at a wall and hope that things stick. And when they do, then you can focus on a few things. When you're in that scale-up phase and that next growth, you have to be a lot more disciplined about what you're going to focus your time on and what you're not. I spent a lot of time early on in my time at Domain talking to teams about the difference between speed and velocity. And that sounds strange because they're both the same concepts, but they are fundamentally different. Speed is about how fast you can go, and velocity is about how fast you can go, but in the right direction. Speed gets you nowhere. And the bigger the business becomes, and as you move into that scale, speed actually becomes an anchor. Because if you've got multiple teams running fast in all different directions, nothing good happens other than chaos.
Nothing gets finished.
Nothing gets finished.
Yeah.
Velocity is about maybe taking the time up front to agree on the direction, to align teams together, and then moving as fast as possible. I saw the benefit of this at Google, and I used to spend a lot of time talking to people about the process of product development and deployment at Google. And people would come into the business and actually be really frustrated by a feeling of how slow things were to get moving. And I used to sort of talk about this concept of from getting from A to C, you need to get to B first. And B is getting everyone aligned. Now, you could do that A to B process really, really short and not make sure that everyone's aligned and then start running really fast. But the line from B to C is going to be very wobbly. What happened at Google is there's a lot of time up front just aligning people and making sure that everyone was involved and aligned and stakeholders were aligned. And so what ended up happening is you were able to actually accelerate really, really fast once you decided that you wanted to do things, and you always ended up at C faster.
I read somewhere, I think it was a book I recently read, that if you try and develop 3 or 4 products and you sort of spend a bit of time on this one, then a bit of time on this one, then a bit of time on this one, you might never get that one to market. Yeah,
there's a lot of psychology and studies out there that show that really people can grasp onto 3 things.
Yeah.
So we spend a lot of time on Domain. What are the 3 priorities?
Yeah.
And if you've got 4, which one are you going to drop?
Yeah.
Which one are you going to say no to?
I believe in the rule of 3s. That's why there was 3 bears and
exactly
3 mice and Yep. The list goes on. So talk to me
no,
about...
No one remembers Ringo.
No, I guess that's true too. So talk to me about Domain and COVID. Like, so how have you found the whole COVID period from March forward?
I've seen a lot of people talk about COVID across the business community and the real estate community in hindsight as an opportunity to demonstrate leadership. And I'm super proud of the way that Domain has stepped forward very, very quickly in very meaningful ways to demonstrate leadership. I spent a lot of time talking with the teams within Domain, in particular leadership team, and this is my personal view, but crises and times of challenge are really the times where reputations are made. You know, profits are made in the good times, reputations are made in the bad times. And so we very, very early put our hands up and said, this is the time for us to actually step forward and support the industry and support our partners and stakeholders. So we took action really early around an industry support package, which recognised cash flow challenges, which recognised the fact that everyone needed to focus on just getting through this dip. We did some innovative things with our workforce. So we launched a project called Project Zipline. We had the same impact that most other businesses had through that time, which was, a cash flow decline. And we needed to deal with that. And we have stakeholders. We have a major shareholder. We have a lot of independent shareholders. So we had to actually work on our own cost base. But at the same time, we know that during that period, there was a lot of demand to actually accelerate technology and accelerate adoption. So how do we deal with that challenge? We wanted to avoid the situation of just actually going down this standard path of redundancies and layoffs or stand downs, hours reductions. So we went to our employees and said, we will offer you the option of, moving to a 4-day week. But what we prefer you to do is actually stay at 5 days a week. And for that 5th day, instead of paying a cash salary, we'll actually issue shares that represents that. And those shares will be payable at a period in the future.
Yeah.
And over 90% of our staff backed that idea and came back. So we didn't drive any redundancies. We didn't reduce staff. In fact, we actually increased our focus and our velocity on product and technology. And out the back of it, we will have a significant proportion of our workforce who are material shareholders in our business and who are willing to back the business, who did sacrifice across that, but will get benefit of the upside. We did that because we know that there was a big ravine in front of us. There's a big dip of uncertainty. We didn't know how far the other side was, but we also knew that as we were coming out the other side, this was a strong business that would actually benefit from the investments in accelerating technology and deployment. And so we called it Project Zipline because it was really about, zipping across the top of that ravine and making sure that we had as many people as possible and as many capabilities and as much capacity as possible at the other side of that ravine.
Yeah.
Look, the thing I'm probably most proud of is an idea that emerged very early on, which was we could provide all the support we could to our employees, to our stakeholders, commercial support. But the one thing that people really did get challenged with in COVID was the stress and mental health. I spent a lot of time talking to Chris Hanley and the team that's sort of working with Rise, and Domain is stepping in to partner with them. But it's a serious issue. Now, staff at Domain have the privilege of access to an employee assistance program. And so if you need someone to talk to, if you needed that support, that was there. We recognized that across the industry, that was not always the case. There were many networks that provide that sort of support, but this is such a diverse industry and with people in different formats and structures. And so what we did was open up that program to everyone within the industry for a period of time so that if you did need someone to talk to and you needed that help and you needed that support, particularly with mental health, that we were able to sort of step forward and provide, a service to our partners. And that sort of makes me really proud because that's thinking about people and that's really, true partnership.
I heard that actually. A couple of agents called me and said, my Domain rep's just been around and wow, it was a bit of a wow experience, and actually sort of said about the employee assistance program and also, just about listings, the team had taken the time to have a look at what listings were on the market and really supportive.
The reason that I'm so proud of that is it came from an idea. It's kind of like it's this fatherly figure of actually being so proud because things that you're trying to teach or things that you're trying to work with, you see in your kids. And it's not trying to be paternalistic about this, but we'd spent a lot of time saying, let's move away from selling products to working with our partners and delivering solutions. And the real solution there was not more cash flow support or more extended products or support on listings. The real solution there was actually helping people with their fundamental health and well-being.
Yeah, well, I definitely think it's gone a long way to doing that.
Yes, it's something that I'm very proud of, and it's something that is definitely a source of pride across, the teams at Domain.
Yeah, absolutely. What's your strategy moving forward now for Domain?
Yeah, so we've spoken quite openly about our strategy of this pivot from a classifieds business to a marketplace. And I'll just touch on the details there, because what that gets to is, it sounds simple, but it's quite complex. And the reality is classified businesses have evolved and have been incredibly successful as they've moved online. And you're seeing that around the world. They do, however, take a lot of the same concepts that previously existed in print and just transition them into an online environment. You create a marketplace with the largest audience possible, which provides the demand side, and then you aggregate as much supply as possible in this industry. It's listings. The challenge you have is what happens when you get to all the listings, which is largely what's happened in Australia. What happens when the audience gets as big as you can get? The second question is, the only way to really drive that business, and if you look at the products are fundamentally a print ad that's been redone on a mobile screen.
Yeah.
And so let's be honest about that. Not a lot of innovation through there. And the way you drive that business is through price and through distribution. There's an end game to that. We would rather be part of that change than actually resisting the change. So this transition to the marketplace is stepping away from selling ads towards delivering solutions. Now, a large part of those solutions is going to be helping agents and vendors find willing buyers. But the game is not so much about the largest audience possible and then allowing and requiring agents and vendors to sift through the different levels of quality of leads towards actually providing a solution, which is, how do we drive efficiency through that process? How do we actually match with the most qualified buyer possible? How do we stop the 80% of phone calls and inquiries that are tire kickers, people who just want to know a price point or just, interested because they live next door, and moving to that model. And so you're starting to see that evolve. We could talk about this till the cows come home, but unless we actually take action, and we're starting to put, our money behind our words. We're investing in businesses that provide real solutions. We're building platforms that provide support. Our commercial models and our approach to products like leads, for example, are fundamentally differentiated from an approach that we would have taken if we were just, had our blinkered eyes on a classified model.
So can you explain a little bit more about the approach to leads?
Yeah, leads is a really interesting example of that difference between a classifieds approach and a marketplace approach. If we were just thinking about being a classifieds business, we would look at this situation that says we get this really large audience, and we've been so focused on buyers that come to our site and then converting them into ads.
Put in your email address.
Exactly.
Send it off.
And send off this inquiry and then just walking away. We don't really care about the quality of the email. It could be a neighbor that's just interested in a price. It could be a tire kicker, but we've sent you an email, you deal with it. And then sort of stepping back and saying, but we get a lot of people who come to our site who are potential sellers. And how do we convert that through? And then let's just find those leads and sell them in a similar way without qualifying them. We've gone a very different way. The problem is still there. How does an agent find the next listing? Our starting hypothesis was, let's look at the data. And the data showed that these leads don't come from Mars. Yeah. Most potential vendors or people who are going to put their property for sale already exist in the database of an agent or a group of agents already. It's just that those agents, it's difficult and time consuming to know the exact right time to use that database and contact the individual and seek to assist them in selling that house. So what we can do, and this is the assets that we bring us, that timeliness, that signal of when that property is likely to come up for sale based upon the data that we have. We match it together with the data sets that the agents have where there's existing relationships and just make their jobs more efficient. What are the first 3 phone calls you should make in that morning that are going to deliver the best result? We're not selling leads. We're providing a service to make agents' lives more efficient, to rank and stack rank the phone calls they should be making. And so that's another example of just a fundamental difference in the approach. It's more than words. It's coming through in the actual commercial outcomes and the way we're structuring products.
Yeah. So that's that rule of threes again.
It is.
Yeah. So it's interesting. And I saw some products like this in the US where, not everyone's going to sell all the time. I mean, COVID may bring a completely different set of circumstances rather, where there's a lot of people in the US thinking about moving at the moment. 1 in 5 have thought about it or taken steps to do it. But I'm guessing with the data that you've built up historically, you'd almost be able to predict who's ready in some sort of way.
This is the really interesting thing. Often the moment you say the word data, it evokes fear.
Yeah.
And agents say, well, you're trying to steal my data or my data is valuable. So there's 2 things I would say. Data can be the biggest asset a business has and also the biggest liability. It's the biggest asset you have if it's not data, but you convert that data into insights, actions, and activities. If you just leave it as data, it's nothing but a liability. Yeah. And you're seeing that with hackers, and there's a cost to protect this. And if you're not using it, it's a bad thing. The other thing I would say is that our data sets are completely different to every agent's data sets out there. The best agents out there, and the best way to is sort of a case study, a really, really good agent should know that John Smith owns 6 Stanley Street. They should know John's wife's name. They should know that they have 3 kids, what coffee they like, what sports they like, when they bought that property, where they like to holiday, that depth of information. From a domain perspective, we don't need to know any of that. We are not even interested in that. We don't run businesses that actually benefit because we don't have that relationship with that. And that's relationship data.
Yep.
What we know, though, is that somewhere along the lines, we've got a signal that 6 Stanley Street or someone who owns or lives or a device that sits there looks like it's last Tuesday starting to look at potentially selling that property. So we could do one of 2 things. Firstly, we could interject, stand between the agent and that relationship, put up a big wall and then sell a lead over that. Or we could actually just go to the agent and say, well, now's the time that you should actually make that phone call to a contact that you already have. The data that we have is timeliness. It's not depth. The data that agents have is depth. Together, what we're doing is actually bringing value to a data set that's otherwise sitting there and being dormant.
Yeah, absolutely. And a good experience to the consumer by the sounds of it.
Absolutely.
Because
consumers want choice.
Yeah.
Consumers don't want ads. And if the choice comes in the form of ads, and if ads are informative, if they get delivered a service, and that's one thing I learned at Google. If I came to you and said, would you like ads in your search stream, your immediate answer says no.
Yeah.
But the experience shows that if those ads are actually informative and are relevant, then it enhances the experience. And so again, let's be very careful about the solutions. If we can actually solve problems, deliver solutions, the problem here is an agent that wants to find a listing and a vendor that wants to sell a house. How do we solve that? And what's the best way to do it? Rather than I have a business model, which I'm going to actually force upon this situation and try to solve it in the way that I would rather solve it. We're going down a different path. We want to figure out what's the best way to solve it for the agent and for the vendor.
Yeah, interesting. Well, you've made one acquisition recently that is quite an interesting one, Realtime Agent. Can you tell me a little bit about why that was attractive to you?
Yeah, again, this gets to the point of how do we actually solve real challenges. One of the challenges that agents will talk about is efficiencies, it's workload, it's how do I automate? How do I make the most use of my time and spend more of my time on the things that add value? If you think about where agents add value, it's through relationship support. It's through hand-holding people through one of the most complex, emotionally charged processes that they will ever experience in their life. There's this really interesting sort of dichotomy. If you go around the world, and it's no different in Australia, what are the top 3 most trusted professions and then the bottom 3? And if you look at the bottom 3 all around the world, whether it's the bottom, the second bottom, or the third bottom, it's real estate agents. I think that's consistent.
Unfortunate.
But it is and that's where it is. But the moment that I step forward and decide that I'm going to sell my property is the moment that someone enters that transaction who is less trusted than any agent out there, and it's myself. I don't trust myself. I don't trust myself because I'm so emotionally attached to this. I don't trust myself because it's on average been 10 years since I've done this. And I have no experience and no qualifications to actually do this well. And this asset is probably the single most important asset in my life and for my future. And so we, as an industry and agents as an industry, have a very privileged position to be able to step in and support people through that incredibly complex, emotionally charged process. And that's where, how does it, as an agent, how do you spend time on that support and that process, whether it's through hand-holding through that process or whether it's, at the end in that negotiation and helping a buyer through a similarly emotionally charged, complex, scary process. How do I do that rather than make sure that I filled out all my forms and make sure that, that I've done all the admins and compliance needs that are necessary? So Realtime Agent, Angus and Daniel built an extraordinarily strong business. We were super attracted to the solutions they built because they had got into the detailed workflow of what agents needed. They came from the industry. They built solutions from the industry. And for us, that's a signal of the future of what we want to do. The other thing is you really want to work with people that you enjoy working with. And I had such an extraordinarily great experience in sort of meeting and getting to know Angus and Daniel that it just seemed like the right thing to do. They brought so much to our business, and we've got really exciting plans going forward, but they've built products that actually solve problems. So how do I actually digitize those important points that drive efficiency? So they're taking hours out of every transaction that an agent would spend on low value tasks and admin tasks. They're providing platforms to automate and to not replace agents, but actually act as assistants to allow them to do the right things and spend their time on where they add more value.
Yeah, and so important right now too.
Absolutely.
Particularly with COVID going on and all that sort of thing. Like there's a lot of stuff that can be automated that still isn't.
My experience from Google is the biggest barrier to automation and transformation is not the availability of technology. It's the anchor of the past. I've always done this in the past and I want to do it going forward because it's worked for me in the past. I think that history will show, if you look across every single industry and every single job and every single role, the biggest impediment and barrier to future success is the anchor of past success.
Yeah. It's
the ability to actually let go of what's been successful in the past and understand what you need to do to be successful in the future. And that's where, I think Angus and Daniel have actually built a great business because they're able to demonstrate very quickly and very easily how something so simple can add so much value to an agent, to a principal, to an office and to admin staff.
So I want to go back to, I think, probably leads again for a second, because I've heard that you've got this new product coming out called Early Access or Domain Early Access, which is, I guess, in response to, let's call it the off-market trend for the moment, even though it's not really off-market, it's on-market. Yeah. So talk to me about how that's come about, that domain, and how you're developing that.
Again, let's start with the products you design, the way that you go to market really are based upon the culture that you have and the strategy you have in place. So if you start defining on market, off market, on portal, off portal, you really build products within those frames. So as a classifieds business, you want every listing to be publicly listed. You want all the audience possible to see those listings, and you want that transaction and those leads to happen through a very narrow funnel, which is a website, mobile app and the like. That's actually not the way that property is sold. So we could talk about off portal or off market, but every single property that's sold is always available for sale for a period of time without being on a portal. There's a period of time between when the authority's signed and when it's listed. So, you're taking photos, you're preparing floor plans. It's available for sale. There's a contract in place that it's legally can be sold. There's also people who want to sell their property or need to sell their property because of different needs that don't want to be on a publicly listed portal. And that's fine. And that's great. This has always existed. When we remove those frames of just saying that we have to actually push everything to a classifieds business, we have to do that, all of a sudden ideas bloom. And early access is really about understanding how do we actually help support using data of helping an agent deliver real value to a vendor and do their job from the moment that that authority is signed, rather than waiting for days, weeks or months later for when the listing hits our portal. And so early access is about making that property available for sale and showcasing it to high intent buyers that we know from 30 minutes after the authority is signed. And so what that is doing a few things. Firstly, it's demonstrating value that the agent is providing directly to the vendor. The vendor knows that they've walked out of that room after signing the authority, and the agent is immediately working on identifying quality buyers. Now, it might just so happen, as we've had in the last week or two, that you find the buyer straight away. You find that person that really, really wants that property and they get in there, and we've had that. Now, it may be that actually you don't find the person who's willing to actually purchase that property straight away, but you actually start to get feedback on pricing expectations. You hit the first open home inspection with, a list and a group of high intent potential buyers, rather than building that up through the open home inspections. You're hitting the first open inspection with volume, with intent. It doesn't replace activities that the agents or the agent systems and social media platforms and campaigns and the access and the use of their database and networks. That's always going to be an incredibly attractive, incredibly important part of how an agent supports a vendor. This just turbocharges it.
Yeah.
It takes that to a bigger audience.
Yeah. So it's like an add-on
Absolutely.
to all of that sort of stuff.
Yep.
So, there are some agents that, particularly like, let's just say in the eastern suburbs and things like that, I like to think of them as the old telephone exchange operators, like you who are up here, you're ready to downsize. So you're going to go in there, and I've got this person over here that's going to go in there.
Yep. And
so this actually brings a wider selection of.
It's just supporting that. Again, I just think about this as automation and data is yes, there might be a large database there, but any database that sits out there within agents is compromised for two things. Firstly, and this is the data, we've seen this through the work we've done on leads. The best I've seen in the many pilots and trials we've seen is that agents' databases are about 50% accurate.
Yeah.
So 50% of it has wrong contact details, old contact details. Again, that's a liability, not an asset. The other thing that we've seen is that it adds. So yes, you can connect those dots on those telephone exchanges, but what happens if there's a really willing buyer that sits on someone else's telephone exchange or somewhere else, an expat that's returned to the country, or someone who's, has never really been interested in this suburb ever before, but through a job change becomes interested. So it's just additive rather than replacing. Yeah. And it's turbocharging through a period of time where the agent is visibly working hard on behalf of that vendor.
Yeah. Let's walk through an example of how it works. Here I am. Actually, I'm signing paper, but let's pretend I'm signing glass and saying, Jason.
Yeah, let's talk about the future. It has to be on glass. Yeah. Like it has to.
Yeah.
The moment you start signing that on that paper, firstly, it's inefficient.
Yeah.
Secondly, increasingly, it's a compliance risk.
Yeah.
Have you signed it right? Has it been filed right? If we look at the various associations and, consumer affairs and, all across the country, the sanctity of that paper and the accuracy of that paper becomes a big liability risk.
Yeah.
Sign it on glass so that you're sure that every T is crossed and every I is dotted.
Yeah.
And no one has to hold onto that piece of paper and go back to the office and file it. And it's not in the system 3 days later once that's been processed.
Yeah.
That's a liability. An asset is doing it on the glass. Once it's done through that glass and you sign that, there is nothing to stop you from immediately actually triggering the commencement of that campaign.
Yeah.
And triggering it automatically, not relying upon an agent or a back office staff or some other process to actually step through that next step, but triggering it automatically, automating the process. So why don't you immediately go out to your own CRM database? Why don't you immediately go out to social platforms? Why don't you immediately go out to the domain database and very rapidly start engaging with really high intent buyers? It's not to say that most of those listings are not going to end up at some point in a public listed portal. There is a lot of data that shows that process does get the best results in terms of price because you're actually, you're going out to an even larger audience over time. There's a lot of data that shows that then, for example, moving it to an auction situation generates the best outcome because, again, it's a larger audience. You're generating broad-based intent and interest and going through that process. So I don't think that this fundamentally is looking to change or radically shift the pathways. What it is about doing is just supporting all the multitude of different pathways that already exist and turbocharging those, rather than standing here as a participant in the industry saying you have to play with our model. You have to play the game by our rules. We would rather actually step into your rules and provide a solution.
Yeah, absolutely. Who wants to even touch paper anymore? I mean, COVID's changed that too, actually.
Absolutely.
So I've just digitally signed my agency agreement and you're my agent. I feel like I've got a very important agent though in you. So in practice, what happens if I'm the vendor and you're the agent?
So one of the services we're providing is that the moment we sign this and the moment we agree on the marketing schedule, I'm working for you. We're going immediately out to a database that we have and a database that Domain provides to actually find out who are the really high intent buyers that are out there that are interested in this specific property at this specific time. And within 30 minutes, we'll start exposing this property to people and I'll start getting responses. We'll talk to you over the next few days about pricing and expectations and interests and aspects. But in 2 weeks, that's when we'll publicly list it. We will talk over the next few weeks as to, look, are we getting close on price expectations before we publicly list it? Or do we actually proceed to that publicly listed process? Do we proceed right through that? Again, what I'm doing is over those calls is I'm immediately working for you and we're immediately going to continue that dialogue. I'm not walking out and sort of a vendor who's sitting there saying, I've just signed this authority. I've just agreed to this marketing schedule. And the next point of contact seems to be an open home inspection in 4 weeks' time. What this process is doing is actually immediately demonstrating value. Now, let's be honest, the best agents out there do this. They are supporting vendors all the way through. And that's great. You know that they're out there. But if you were to look and expand this across the entire industry, principals will know that there are agents within their networks that don't do that as well. And this is a process that actually probably has more upside in those situations because the principals and the franchisees and franchise owners can be sure that this is actually happening and it's being supported. And then the best agents who are out there who are doing this anyway have to spend less time doing this because a lot of it's automated and can spend their quality time on higher value add activities.
As soon as you make that sort of decision or any decision, like I've just decided you're my agent, my first thought, and it doesn't matter whether you're choosing an agent or choosing a hairdresser or choosing a whatever, is, oh my God, have I made the right choice?
Well, I think you've touched on something really interesting. It's such a nerve-wracking process. There is so much at stake if I'm a vendor.
Yeah.
And I think it's wrong to assume that the moment that you've signed the authority and agreed to the marketing schedule, that those nerves go away.
Yeah.
In fact, they escalate.
Yeah.
Have I made the right decision?
Yeah.
And so how can an agent, knowing that those nerves escalate, start delivering visible services and feedback to calm those nerves?
Yeah.
So yes, have I made the right decision? But if all of a sudden a day or two later, I'm starting to get interested in my property, it may not be exactly at the level that I'm happy with, but I can see movement and I can see interest and I can see intent. That's a way of actually calming those nerves and supporting someone through that incredibly emotionally charged process.
Yeah. And I imagine that, I'm not into predicting the future anymore. Actually, I never was really, but, with things post-COVID and what's happening now, nobody really knows what's going to happen. No. And there's going to be probably a lot of nervous people out there that are going to need some assurance from their agent.
I think that's one thing that I've just been extraordinarily impressed with the agent community, that their ability and their resilience to actually support and encourage people through such a complex process. I'll go back to what I said at the beginning. In the middle of one of the most extraordinarily difficult periods that most of us have ever experienced, they still got 70% of people to go through one of the most difficult, complex and mostly charged processes of selling the house.
Yeah.
So we can look at and be worried about the fact that volumes are down 30%. I'm just completely blown away that 70% of people still went through that transaction and got good results.
Yeah.
You can see that on prices and clearance rate and got good outcomes because there's a lot of buyers still through that. It probably shows the quality of the industry we have in Australia because that result is so much superior to the real estate impact in all the other markets that we look at, whether that's the UK, the US, Canada. Our ability to actually retain those sales and the sort of drop in listings it was smaller than many of those other markets. And that's not by chance. That's not an accident. That's because of the quality of people we have working in this industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd agree with that. In fact, I've said a few times to various people that I think people are going to want agents more in this. I was calling it a post-COVID world, but I'm not doing that anymore either because I think we're just in it. But coronavirus and its associated complications have actually meant that I would be way less likely to want to deal with people and the hand sanitizer and all that sort of thing. I want an agent more now than I ever have.
Absolutely. And I think that we spend a lot of time talking about COVID accelerating technology trends. Yeah. And that's completely true. Absolutely. And I saw this, through the GFC. You could see it in Asia, through the Asian crisis. Like all these things, they don't change behaviors. They don't change processes where you have disruptive events. what they do is they accelerate existing trends.
Yeah.
And so digitization's been accelerated. There'll be more people signing on glass after this than before. But the thing that most people miss, it also accelerates another trend, which is the demands from vendors and buyers and the necessity for agents to actually decide what they are offering. Are they offering a product, as in I help you sell your house, or are they offering a service? And that transition and the demand and the necessity towards service. And service is about relationships, about negotiations. It's about the quality of you as a human and a professional bringing that support to that relationship, as opposed to a product, which is an ad or a brochure or a piece of technology. And I think COVID's accelerating that need to define and deliver quality services as an agent. And you'll be able to do that through sort of adopting the assistive technology products that actually support you rather than getting in the way, letting go of some of the manual processes that were there in the past and spending that time that's saved on delivering a service.
Yeah. Let's go back one step. There's been a lot written in the past about your former employer, Google, and Facebook and even Amazon entering the real estate space. What do you think of that sort of disruption? Do you see any of that sort of disruption coming from those guys?
Been there, done that. Interesting story. So Greg Ellis is on our board. I was previously CEO of realestate.com.
I remember him, actually.
Yeah, you do. And I remember him. One of the first interactions was actually one of the first projects I worked on when I joined Google back in 2008 was the launch of a real estate portal.
Right. Wow.
On Google. It's a solution. It's an insight that, and we still see this today. The first thing that people go to once they see, property listing or interest is a map. They want to know where it is, what's the relation, what the times. And at that point in time, none of the listing portals actually had maps features. And so what we did was launch a portal that was based upon Google Maps. We actually worked with a lot of the real estate institutes, a lot of the franchise groups. We ended up getting about 70% of the listings in the country.
Yeah, wow.
On Google Maps. We shut down that product in 2 years. Obviously, it wasn't great for our relationship from a Google perspective with some big advertisers like realestate.com at that time. But it was a big learning for me. The reason why we shut that product down was we had an audience that was factors larger than any real estate portal at that point in time. We had 70% of the listings. So you have a marketplace. We couldn't commercialize it because we needed a sales force to go out and work office by office and agent by agent to actually encourage them to sell the product on our behalf, to standing in a living room and actually explain why this Google portal or this real estate portal was worth a vendor investing in. And so for me, that's a big learning. And I bring that into this role just to say that our agent partners are so important because we don't sell our product to the end vendor. It's the agents that are sitting in the living room that have to have the confidence and support to sell this product. And that's a fundamental rock that I view and think about strategy and our plans. So I can see the problem. The biggest challenge for Google is, and it's the same with Facebook, is those businesses do not scale by sales teams. We put in a plan to say this is a really good business. It's a starting point, but we need a sales team to start developing the commercialization of this product. And the moment that you put a business plan in Facebook or Google that involves a sales team and scaling a sales team, it gets immediately knocked back. They don't scale with people. They scale through technology. So, you can start to see how that plays out. For Google, real estate, it's not the most important vertical. The biggest, most important vertical is shopping and commerce. And there is a land grab there between Google and Amazon. 50% of product searches in the US go directly to Amazon, don't go through Google. So the best engineers, the most serious senior management attention globally are focused on how does Google solve shopping. Facebook is similar. Where are the best engineers? Where is the M&A? Where is their focus? It's on solving news and platform issues and conversations on that politics and platforms. Yeah. So marketplace is great, but how do you actually grow and commercialize that? Because the value is only there if it can connect to the audience and you can see the ROI. And so again, I go to the top three things. Is someone at Facebook, is someone at Google sitting there and saying real estate's my top three? Probably not. Real estate for us, it's not a question of whether it's in the top three. It is 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
And so you're seeing this around the world. Like there's a lot of solutions that are being able to deliver. So I am less worried I'm paranoid about being disrupted as a business. Absolutely. Let's be very clear about that. There's no arrogance or there is nothing. It's what keeps me up at night. Facebook and Google don't keep me up at night. In fact, I see them as partners to access audience. I see them as partners to grow business and deliver solutions. What keeps me up at night is also not another marketplace that comes along with the same model, because I know how difficult it is to build marketplaces. What keeps me up at night is two kids in a garage who figure out a way to disrupt the entire industry, who start to do things like, for example, recognize that properties sell off market, that there actually is no off market, on market. It's just a sales process, and develop a solution that basically completely disrupts the entire industry. And so that, again, is why we're going down this path, because we would actually want to be part of that disruption and be involved in that rather than worrying about it. I like my sleep.
Yeah.
And I sleep a lot more certain when I know that at Domain, we're thinking about how do we solve solutions that our clients, our customers, our buyers, our sellers, our vendors, our agents have, rather than sitting there saying, how do we solve our own problems? How do we grow this business?
Yeah. So it's not an all or nothing thing. It's
No.
different things might suit different people at different stages of their journeys.
Yeah, I think that we often get stuck in these mental models of sales processes and funnels. And a lot of that is because in the traditional world, you actually didn't have an insight into these different journeys. And so you had to say, well, the average journey is someone looks at an ad on a portal, fills in an inquiry. The inquiry goes to the agent via email. The agent returns via phone call. That person then goes to an open home inspection. What we're actually seeing, and this is the value of data, is that is actually the minority of journeys where there is a linear journey. Actually, a significant proportion of people turn up for the open home inspection, never having sent an inquiry. But they know the property is open for inspection because they've seen an ad elsewhere. An interesting thing early on in early access product, one of the properties that sold through this product, the person saw the property through the distribution and an early access alert, never inquired on the property. They just walked into the real estate office physically and said, hey, I'm interested in this property. There was no inquiry. There was no lead. There was no e-commerce funnel and conversion. And so, sometimes you can get stuck in trying to build a strategy on these mental models of funnels and processes. I think you're better off just trying to basically solve a solution for how your customers want to transact, how they want to find a property, how vendors want to actually experience that process. Solve those problems rather than trying to actually be smart and define a linear process and optimize for something that is actually a fabrication.
Yeah, or could just be in your head.
Could be in my head.
Yeah.
My experience of one.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't believe how quickly time has flown. I just feel like, the last sort of 50 minutes has just gone like that. But I guess in wrapping up, do you have any other tips for agents, sort of navigating this current coronavirus, post-coronavirus world?
If I was to look back on my last 10 to 15 years of career, I've been privileged enough to see a lot of businesses fundamentally transform. I've seen the Ubers and the Netflixes and those businesses. I started working with them with Netflix when it was a DVD distribution business. I've also seen behemoths really struggle and trip. And the biggest single factor that I see in terms of that is the concept we spoke about earlier, which is the biggest anchor for future success is being beholden to the past success. And so think forward what good looks like going forward and what you're going to need to be and what you're going to need to deliver. And going forward, it's absolutely about delivering a high quality service. It's not about delivering a product. It's not about information arbitrage, knowing something that other people don't know. That's all going to zero. The internet is solving that.
Yeah.
Your buyers and vendors will probably come into these transactions knowing more about property and trends and marketplaces than you ever will. So as an agent, what's the value? The value is hand-holding someone through the most emotionally charged, complex, high-risk process that they will ever go through in their life. And so what are the tools, skills, capabilities, learnings that will enhance your ability to deliver that quality service? What are the things that you're able to automate and get out of the way so you can spend more time on delivering that quality service? Change is not a one-off. Change is now the norm.
Yeah.
And it's accelerating. And I keep going back to that thing is making sure that past success is not an anchor for future success.
Yeah, absolutely. That is really good advice. Jason Pellegrino, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Elevate from Elite Agent. To download your written action guide from this podcast containing extra tips, links and shortcuts, visit eliteagentelevate.com.